So, Doc, now that the Snyder Cut is out there taking the internet by storm, I was thinking of putting together a minor defense of Joss Whedon's Justice League. You know, the one that everybody loves to hate.
You are out of your damn little pea-sized mind. What is wrong with you? Do you have any sense at all?
Okay, this is going to be a short one because there aren't many things to defend, but as one of the people who prefer Whedon's more grounded, realistic and layered approach to filmmaking over Snyder's darker must mean deeper, overblown, over-muscled and over-CGI'd style, then I thought I'd offer some insight to try to see what Whedon was going for in his 2017 cut, even if most of the time it crashed and burned harder than a salad at a kid's McDonald's party.
You really are out of your mind!
Now first things first, Whedon's cut is shit. On that we can all agree. It's convoluted, contrived, rushed, and in general a desperately weak attempt at a superhero movie.
I can barely do it now.
However, I think it's interesting to bear in mind that it probably didn't matter much who was brought in to replace Snyder at this insanely late stage of production. They would have likely fared no better. I imagine the studio took one look at Snyder's marathon and, given the lukewarm reception to his previous films, made these suggestions. Make it 2 hours, make it funnier, make it family friendly, make fans love it, and make it fast. And Whedon, in a mistake that would come to define his career, accepted. Again, I'm not defending Whedon's cut. You can't defend shit. But when you're working with this studio in this time frame with these demands, I highly doubt anyone could have done much better. Although, probably with fewer allegations. But now that Snyder's version is out and taking nerd culture by storm, I thought this would be the perfect time to see where, if minorly, Whedon's version might be better.
What are you, nuts?
Okay, perhaps better is a stretch longer than Wonder Woman's lasso seems to be. But what we can do now is put the films side by side to see what Whedon was at least hinting at that was actually left out of Snyder's version. First, let's look at exactly what Whedon might have been aiming for. I think what he was trying to do was inject some levity and light into a series that casual viewers, studio execs, and box offices worldwide were telling them was too grim in tone. Notice I'm not using the word dark here. Dark and gritty get thrown around in Hollywood like CGI in a Zack Snyder film. Oh yeah, I've got to remember my probable audience. I mean, get thrown around like
a beach ball at a Nickelback concert.
For me, a lot of Snyder's story choices up to and including his cut of Justice League can be defined in terms of him mistaking darker for deeper. In some cases, there might be some validity to this approach, as darker tends to lend more mystery and drama to the tone, but in most cases, what equals more depth is exactly that, depth. Character arcs, internal conflict, intrapersonal clashes, differing ideals which lead to completing methods, and a developing message as embodied by superheroes from vastly different backgrounds. If you look closely, or in some cases not so closely, you'll notice these are all elements that have characterized Whedon's original Avengers films. Two acclaimed and risky entries that it must be said would likely not be as good if not for Whedon's very detailed approach. In fact, now that I'm placing the films together, it's interesting to note how similar Snyder's Justice League is to Whedon's Avengers films. Both include a dome fortress, introduce 3 new members, add a minor romance between the group, include the group arguing over resurrecting or erecting one of their members, the main cast take it in turns beating up the villain while the rest deal with his mindless minions, includes a finale in Eastern Europe, a voiceover montage at the end, and perhaps biggest of all, has a minion of a sidekick seeking to prove himself via hologram to the big bad shrouded in mystery. Oh, and of course the superhero pose. Yeah, now that I look at it, no wonder the studio opted to bring Whedon in. And not to be that guy, but Whedon managed to do both of his films in under 2.5 hours. A veritable picnic compared to Snyder's 4-hour feast fit for overindulgent fanboy gods.
Get in my belly!
But is there anything worth salvaging from Whedon's Frankenstein of a movie? Or was the whole affair truly the pile of trash YouTube has been lighting on fire now for 4 years? Okay, it's probably the latter, but let's pick through the ashes of Whedon's version to see if there are at least some redeeming aspects in his film. Part 1, Diana and Bruce. Okay, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things wrong with this scene, as has been extensively noted all over the internet, such as Ben Affleck's sluggish physique, his less than intimidating rubber suit, the clunky and forced dialogue, etc, etc. But what underlies this is an attempt to bring 2 characters with established tension together. It may be a misguided attempt, but I can at least see where he was going with it. As we got in Snyder's final version, Batman and Wonder Woman barely say 2 words to each other after this.
Things that we have. Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's okay.
Don't worry about it. It happens.
I think here we get Snyder's idea of sexual tension, which is strange because it was executed and written so much better in his own Batman vs Superman. What's equally baffling is the rest of the movie seems to forget this ever happened, with the flirting between them never even hinted at again. You've got to ask yourself, why even include it if only to never bring it up or develop it into something? As it stands, it comes across as more of a scene in a noughties teen drama than a darker superhero flick. At least in Whedon's cut we get an extra scene with them together. Forget for a moment about the rushed dialogue, bloated physique, and the rubberiest suit since this. And just think about how much more could and perhaps should have been explored between these two. The tension, which has reached a boiling point between them, was not well handled, but was at least hinting at some form of growth in their relationship. Far be it for characters who have very different views on heroics to, challenge each other and grow as a result. As it stands in Snyder's film, they gel together without much struggle and aren't afraid to fail because they can't get along, but rather because they don't have Superman.
There's no us without him.
Something decidedly less confrontational and deeply weird for Batman in any form to say. Further, I actually like seeing Batman's bruises. It's not handled particularly well.
I can barely do it now.
And the bright exposure of the scene does nothing if not highlight the inadequacies of Bruce's uniform and physique, but at least we see the toll that being Batman is having on him. I just wish Joss had made Bruce more brooding and, well, Batman-like in this scene. Rejecting Diana's need for help and asserting that no matter the cost he'll do whatever he has to. Something that's not only more in line with the comics, but the character from Batman vs Superman as well. Also, just an idea, but why not have Bruce and Diana risk their lives for each other? Have Batman challenge her to be the symbol she's been hiding from, or have her encourage him not to kill. It's clear that Whedon was going for something like this, but what's equally clear is that he failed. Nonetheless, at least we can infer hints from what we got.
I can barely do it now.
Part 2, A Whip Too Far. I've got to admit, while this scene wasn't brilliant in the original, it was a fun use of the whip and probably helped serve the PG-13 rating the studio wanted making kids, blissfully ignorant of the behind-the-scenes turmoil, dream of using it on their parents or something similar. Again, the dialogue is clunky and Aquaman full-on hitting on Wonder Woman is a bit much, even though it's to her amusement. But again, what I like is what's behind it. The group talking about something else other than the plot. Instead, they consider the possibility of failure, talk openly, a little too openly in Arthur's case.
You're gorgeous.
And connect in a way that, while rough on the surface, has good intentions underneath. Albeit when I say underneath, I mean just below the surface. Whedon's cut doesn't exactly go to the abyss here. Regardless, characters revealing who they are through conflict or humour is something that's left out in Snyder's cut. Instead, character conflict is saved mostly for their relationship to their families. Not something that's bad, but these should perhaps exist in their own movies rather than a team-up movie where it's best to see character growth as a reaction to one another. As it stands, Snyder skips over both Bruce and Diana's heat, Aquaman clashing with Victor over his malfunctioning abilities, and the group's confrontation with Superman is left to the physical before they're all buddies again. Indeed, in his version, there's almost no inner tension in a group with 5 highly volatile personalities. Do they not argue over whose methods are better? Does no one have a problem with Batman calling all of the shots? Or whether killing is morally right or wrong? I mean, what if these dead guys were brainwashed or doing this because of their families, Diana? Also, I've just got to say, Diana is supposed to be a role model here because she's kick-ass and looks cool doing it. Except that it she just did was brutally kill these guys, and in deeply over-the-top fashion.
No, Steve, you can't use that. It's not their fault.
Now, I know Snyder loves to watch as his heroes brood by themselves, but it would have been great to see more scenes with our heroes together, so this feels less like a setup movie and more like a team-up one. Part 3.
Do you bleed?
Okay, while Darkseid may not be the primary antagonist in Snyder's film, it's made very clear he's the master of puppets, with the flashback action scene between Earth and Apocalypse actually including Darkseid instead of Steppenwolf fighting. There's no doubt this makes for a cool action scene, but what happens? He's defeated. Now, while I think it's okay for a villain to show vulnerability because it supercharges their motivation for earthly revenge, I prefer Steppenwolf being the one who was previously defeated in Whedon's version rather than Darkseid. And why? Because seeing Darkseid defeated reduces him as an unstoppable threat. If we see Darkseid being beaten or stabbed into retreat at the beginning and we don't see how he's grown so much more powerful in the interim, then why would we believe that Earth couldn't just do that again? And why would we believe that his groveling underling would fare any better? Imagine if we'd seen Thanos be defeated in a flashback in Infinity War. It would have deeply undermined the suspense building throughout the entire film to that point, especially if instead of sending himself, he sent some pathetic underling. It also calls into question why Darkseid doesn't presume the anti-life equation is, on the one planet that has thwarted him. Excuse me, Lord Darkseid, we've conquered literally thousands of planets and found nothing. Don't you think we should go ahead and check that one planet that beat you way back when?
Silence! I will not tolerate your insolence!
Showing Darkseid being defeated could have worked if he were the main villain, bloodthirsty for revenge and destruction because of his bruised pride. But because we don't really spend any time with him other than his menacing snarl when necessary, it leaves us feeling less tension over a villain we already know can be beaten. In essence, villains who bleed are frankly less threatening.
Do you bleed?
Part 4. Fear? If you're going to include a disposable CGI army, at least try to characterize them in some way. Infinity War cleverly did this by having Thanos' army literally be disposable, willing to claw, deface, and tear themselves apart in order to kill. taking the trope to its maximum efficiency and making a point about how Thanos views his minions. Similarly, in Whedon's cut, he was aiming to give the parademons a trait, a unifying characteristic that gives them at least some minor intrigue. They can smell your fear. Okay, it's nothing original, but at least it characterizes them and gives them a desire. Ironically, Steppenwolf, whose downfall in Whedon's cut was lifted direct from the Lion King, ends up succumbing to his own minions, which doesn't exactly paint him as the greatest threat the League could face. But at least here, the parademons have a touch more agency than in Snyder's version, where they simply just stop attacking for reasons, or are all dealt with by the end. No blood, no scratches, barely an inconvenience. Number 5, Batman's backup. It can hardly be debated that Batman has a lot more to do in the final fight of Snyder's film, and is relegated to standing still and shooting a lot less as he was in Whedon's cut. Thank God the Caped Crusader was restored to at least some of his comic book excellence in Snyder's cut. However, that's not the scene I'm referring to. In Whedon's cut, it was Bruce's idea to call Lois as a backup in case Superman respawned a little too
Pet Cemetery.
I actually prefer Whedon's idea here, not only because to expect Lois to be there at the exact second that Superman re-emerges is highly unlikely, but it speaks volumes about Batman's tactical thinking and the heart behind the cape. This version of Batman may fluctuate between bruised, brooding, joking, and oddly suicidal over the course of 2 films, but I like the fact that Batman has a backup in this one scene, at the very least hinting at the kind of tactician he's known for being in the comics. In Snyder's cut, Batman's agency in this scene is reduced a little more to the physical, which is far better than what Whedon gave him.
Something is definitely bleeding.
But at least in Whedon's we got hints as to the strategist in him, if not the true humanity of the man underneath the mask. Just not in the best way.
Bitch. Thought I wasn't listening.
Part 6, no green screen. This is more of a personal gripe than professional criticism, but I like the fact that Whedon includes at least a few scenes that were wholly without CGI. We get the lake scene, the arm cracking scene, and the plane scene, all character moments, which are quite literally glossed over in Snyder's version. Now for the most part, yes, the CGI is a lot better in Snyder's version. However, it's also a lot more present, invading every scene as if it's his own background character desperate to get screen time. I guess it would have been nice to feel like some of the scenes are grounded in reality we live in, and don't involve too many underwater bubbles, computer-generated outfits, planes, gadgets, demons, locations, and villains. I mean, the CGI layering Steppenwolf is so immense it actually kind of becomes the focus of scenes rather than his facial expressions and emotional resonance. So much so, he actually ends up looking more like the offspring of the Silver Surfer in The Abomination than a real otherworldly entity. In contrast, Thanos looked a lot more real. His outfit was less over the top and distracting than Steppenwolf's. I guess Steppenwolf's outfit makes up for a personality that isn't there in either version, but still, toning down the CGI and focusing a little more on the characterization may have helped the film attain some of the weight Thanos commands. As it stands, Snyder's footage can often lessen the reality of stakes or situations because we as the audience know it's shot in a studio, so the only threat possible is the one conjured by the depths of CGI.
Did you ever fight a hippo?
Part 7, The Family. No, I'm not going to try to defend the fact that this family is in the movie. They stick out worse than a brunch joke.
Like brunch. Like, what is brunch?
And as we know by now, the execution just doesn't work. But what's interesting is absolutely the idea behind them, which is the idea that superheroes have consequences for their actions. While Snyder's style tends to focus the lens a little too much on the deities, the gods who are above morals, struggles, consequences, and, well, death, Whedon seeks to shift the lens a little more to the everyday people. This is echoed in his opening montage where we see the fallout of Superman's death and are allowed to understand that the world isn't a very good place and that time has passed. Meaning, Bruce has recovered from his fight with Doomsday and in the fallout of Superman's death has been seeking to start a league, and we here can at least see why. In comparison, much of the final fight of Age of Ultron is either spent rescuing people or looks at the impact of the Avengers' heroics on the world. Including this family in the final battle and having Superman and Flash compete over how many to save is, yes, a rushed misfire of a moment in Whedon's cut, but at least we understand why stopping Steppenwolf is a threat in the immediate. Flip over to Snyder's version and the real-world implications are never even hinted at by anyone outside the League. Also, it gives both the Flash and Superman a little extra to do, which is perhaps minorly interesting. In Snyder's version, Superman pops up at the end, proceeds to kick ass, then
Booyah.
cue the ending. Epilogue. We know who to blame. Okay, there's no denying Snyder's cut is a much better and more complete story. Although, what do you expect after 4 hours and a boatload more post-production time? Comparatively, Whedon's cut may be as far from perfect as can get, but if there's any redemption to be had, it's that it tries to shed light on a few areas unexplored by Snyder and has the decency to be under 2 hours long. In getting $70 million to re-edit his own film, Snyder leans into his ego and Snyderisms and releases 4 hours of what's essentially superhero porn. Add to this his cinematic flair that may as well be a slow-motion signature on every other scene, and you've got a raging visual extravaganza expertly suited to the primitive sections of our brain. So much so, I'd go so far as to say that Zack Snyder has become the Michael Bay of the superhero world. warping absolute mayhem into unapologetic Snyder derivative. The result is an over-the-top superhero outing that's the unmistakable accumulation of his brooding Man of Steel and his even grimmer misfire in Dawn of Justice. I also love that people call Whedon superficial, forgetting if you had to cut Snyder's version in half as the studio demanded, it would probably be just as superficial. Okay, probably nothing could be as bad as the theatrical version, but it would remove a lot of depth necessary to the plot. After all, a story that requires 4 hours to tell completely is one that doesn't really work, especially if you consider that without Corona, the casual viewer might not have looked too favourably on spending 4 hours in the cinema, especially with its R rating. It also begs the question of what Whedon could have done given double the runtime, a lot more time spent in post-production, and an extra 70 million. Would it have been worse? It's hard to imagine anything that bad. Would it have been better? Perhaps. If some of the above plot lines and ideas have been expanded and enhanced organically, then it's not a stretch to suggest maybe, given his previous 2 Avengers hits especially. But would it have been different? Abso-fucking-lutely. And for many of Zack Snyder's outspoken fanbase, that would have been enough to have simply sandbagged Whedon's attempt. If you think about it, and in a way, Snyder fans should probably be thanking Whedon.
What are you, nuts?
Okay, obviously not really, but hear me out. Not only because Whedon's piss-poor attempt led to fan outcry, but also if the director hadn't replaced so many of the original scenes, then the Snyder Cut would have been ruined. By retooling the movie into what the studio wanted, Whedon managed to preserve a lot of Snyder's original footage for fresh eyes. Now don't get me wrong, he didn't do this on purpose, so there's no need to send him a thank you card. Although there's little doubt that by virtue of the bar not being able to be lower, it may have unintentionally aided in the quality of Snyder's realized version.
In Justice League, because there's no time restraint on the film, it does give us an opportunity to really see everyone fulfill their arc within the context of the movie. The emotional journey is there.
Further, and the cynic in me has to mention this, but Snyder actually had a benefit never before seen in cinematic history. Hindsight. He could literally look at what didn't work in Whedon's cut, or what the fans did or didn't like, and alter it for his version. Now I doubt this amounted to much actual change, and Snyder has apparently not even watched the theatrical cut. But it's important to bear in mind that he could, if he wanted, draw from literally the biggest trial and massive error in cinematic history, in order to craft exactly what fans wanted. And even his final version isn't without faults. For instance, I don't think fans really want to realise that Snyder's dream may have filled in a lot of plot holes, but it also opened up a ton of brand new ones, like Mira being British now for some reason, Steppenwolf's one-word explanation, redemption, for his evil actions, the fact that Diana is now a killer, and a brutal one at that, or that Martian Manhunter shows up to persuade Lois to join in with life but doesn't take his own advice until he can make a cool entrance at the end, or that Aquaman basically tells a whole village that Bruce Wayne is Batman again, and those are only scratching the surface. But what's strangest of all is that people seem to forget how impactful, well-received, and in general brilliant Whedon's first 2 Avengers films were. The man had an insanely crucial and highly risky job of creating a united universe as well as a cohesive, entertaining, and layered story, something that had not been done successfully, especially on this scale before. Not only that, but have people forgotten how beloved some of his other properties are? Buffy? Firefly, anyone? The man has proven himself a genius several times over and created some of the most heartwarming stories for us to indulge in. Stories the MCU is still benefiting from now. Was he perfect? No, no one ever is. Does this nullify any of the allegations against him? Of course not, and it's good those are being treated with such seriousness. But neither should we forget that we owe the current success of the MCU in large part due to the one guy writing, directing, uniting, and accomplishing one of the most difficult asks in blockbuster history. Does this exempt him from blame? Does it make his cut better? Not even remotely. But every artist has their creative blunders. His just so happened to be toying with a very volatile and unforgiving fanbase willing to defend Snyder. To the death! In the end, I think it's at least interesting that fans are blaming Whedon far more than they are the studio for the 2017 Frankenstein we got. Having said this, it's clear the Snyder Cut does so many things better than Whedon, or the studio's version. The consistent tone, a plot that makes coherent sense, complete character introductions, a villain who feels at worst vaguely threatening and at best bordering interesting, cool uses of powers, respectful character arcs, the lack of a mustache, and the fact that the film is actually enjoyable now, to name only a few. So while I'm 99% grateful Snyder has given these characters their agency back, I like to think that there are at least a few scattered good ideas in Whedon's version, even if they didn't translate to the final film, or work very well, or, make much sense. But hey, it's good to find the positives and see what we can learn as opposed to just shitting all over it, as cathartic as that may be.
Harry! What?
It's an inanimate fucking object.
You're an inanimate fucking object!
Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Not sure how the Snyder fans will react to this one, but if you like the content and are after some more, then leave a like, subscribe, and all that jazz. Psst, subscribe. Is it just me, or does the Munster soundtrack fit this scene? We've got the vampire, the werewolf, the robot, and the weirdo kid. Now all we need is the Frankenstein.
Do you bleed?
I was dead to the world.